Those of you who are longtime tutors can share some of your knowledge. Then I specifically want to talk about two things that are fairly large things. One is about reading, having students read aloud, and one is about correcting in general and correcting pronunciation. So that's kind of what I'm going with today. All of these things are a little bit different on Zoom, I realize. So if those of you who are on Zoom have something to add, please do. I tutored a bit, taught a bit on Zoom that first 3 months when we all shut down. But since then, I've been tutoring in person, for a long time in mask, the first summer outside. So please jump in, you Zoom people, if you have something to add or change. I'm fine with you jumping in. We're very informal. It's a little hard, I know, on here. So the easiest thing is probably if you mute until you want to jump in, then unmute yourself and jump in. That's fine for me. Yeah, it's really great to see everyone. So I'm Renee. I've been teaching here about 10 years now. Taught in CWI, taught in the public schools, taught overseas, so on and so on. And I'm retiring soon. So this may be my last training. So be kind. And yeah, I appreciate all of you showing up. Here's Bill and what was his last name? Hi, Bill, are you on there?
Yes.
Okay, I see your name, and that's Sally. I can't see your name. Okay, I think I know it's here. 3, 6, 9, 10. I think this may be everyone. Okay, so I guess first, let's just go ahead and open it to some questions. If you're new, maybe you're just wondering what to expect. We've got some messages. Good. This questions are around interrupting and correcting. Good. Yeah, I want to spend most of the time on that. But first of all, do you have any comments or questions or things you've learned that you might want to share with some of the new tutors? Or questions you have either because you're new or questions you have because you've been doing this 20 years and you still have some questions about things?
May I?
Yes, Brenda.
Jump in?
Yes, please do.
One thing that I find interesting is with different students, you talked about having them read aloud. Some prefer that I read first so they can hear how it sounds with a person whose mother tongue is English. And with others, they're fine to just jump in. So I may be answering, I don't know if this is really a question, it's an observation. And also, I guess, is there a theory of what is best to do with them?
Yes, and that's great. And like I said, that's kind of the next thing on the agenda. I'm great with being informal. We'll just jump right into that. So everything I say, I often say, well, it depends. One thing that doesn't depend, I'll start with that. When you're working with a GED student, they do not, N-O-T, big not, they do not need to read aloud. They cannot read aloud on the GED test. They're going to be in a big room with other people. And if they are even mumbling, some of them, are reading at the screen, they'll get kicked out. They cannot read aloud. Reading aloud is a different skill than reading for meaning. So with GED students, do not have them read aloud. I would say the only exception to that with a GED student would be if they're reading a long passage, they get the question wrong, and you're both looking back and going, okay, let's reread paragraph 2. Maybe you read it aloud or they read it aloud just to try to, hone in on what that issue is or how to answer that question. But generally, you're not going to have the GED student sit and read those long passages. Tutors will say, well, how do I know if they're mispronouncing something? It doesn't matter. If they don't know how to say Sacagawea Elementary, it doesn't matter. You need to teach them to say S Elementary and go on. It's a time test. No one cares how they say it. So that's the easy part. And even on the GED test, even the ones now who take it electronically, they have to set up 2 computers, one with the camera and one with the test, and someone's watching them take the test. So we had a woman taking it in Spanish, and her Wi-Fi was shaky. And so she's saying, hey, it's going off, it's blinking, what do I do? Well, the monitor didn't speak Spanish. She thought the test taker was talking to someone outside the room, and she turned off the test and said, "You're done, you cheated." So they cannot mutter, mumble, talk at all. So do not have them read aloud on a GED test. You're going to be sitting there a lot watching them read, but sorry, that's the breaks. It's a little harder on ELL. Some of them do want to read aloud, and I don't know why some of them are so eager to do that. And this is something I'm always a little nervous because I'm telling you, do this, do that. And I think, well, the other teachers, maybe they tell you something different, but this is one we've sat down and talked about, and I can assure you they all feel the same way. The rule of thumb would be do not have the student read it aloud cold. So whether you read it aloud first or they read it silently first, either way is okay. Which is better depends on the student's learning style. And you probably can't ask them that. They aren't going to know. If you give it to me or in Spanish or French, I want to read it first because I learn more visually. That's typical of American students more. A lot of people do learn better orally. Again, gross generalization, but Africans probably learn better orally. So either way is fine. Just don't give them a paper, have them read it cold. I think the best thing to do, I think probably the best thing for our students is usually if you read it aloud first. You can read it a little bit more slowly than you ordinarily would if you were reading to your own children or something. Read it a little bit slower with the proper intonation. You're just slowing down. You're not changing your intonation. Read it a little bit more slowly. You could go paragraph by paragraph and talk about vocabulary. It doesn't hurt to read it a couple more times. There's no harm in reading it 2 or 3 times. Another way to do it is to read it aloud chorally. And last week in the workshop, we did this. I had a paragraph printed out and we all read it. Doing that on Zoom does not work. It wouldn't work here and it wouldn't work with your student. But after you've read it a couple times, then if you have 2 or 3 students and you're not on Zoom, you read it together. They're going to stop when they don't know a word. So, 3 people are reading, then 2, then 3, then 1, then 3, and it's a good way to just practice so they are reading aloud. But if you think about it, if you've ever been in a Spanish class, whatever class, and everybody's taking a turn reading, you're like, those people don't do any better than I do. I'm going to hear the teacher. I'm going to hear the native speaker. I don't want to hear those other bozos. They're worse than me. So I don't know why some students seem so eager to read aloud, and some will push you for that. If they're absolutely adamant about it, after you've read it aloud, after you've read it chorally, after you've discussed, you could have them read a paragraph. I think the best way to do that is when there's questions at the end, have them read a question. Then you can get a little idea of pronunciation, but they're not going to be able to read that paragraph with the proper intonation. So it's better if you're reading that. Brenda, does that answer does that answer your question, Brenda?
Yes, thank you. Thanks. That's really helpful. Yeah. Because one of
I
the
always
things
struggle with.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, one of the things that's always in the back of my mind is I know in some early tutor trainings, I've been tutoring for about 5 years, that most of the lesson, again, not GED, I wouldn't, well, I don't know, but most of the lesson should be the student talking. Like we shouldn't hear our voice more than whatever, 5-10%. And so when there's a long thing to read, I feel like, oh, I'm just, I'm reading. But I think but it seems good that they hear a native speaker. So having them read it to themselves and then read it out loud seems like a good middle ground.
Yeah, that seems to be. I forgot there's something I was going to say in there. But yes, that's usually right. Mary, go ahead. Yeah, Mary's taught elementary school for years. I'd love to hear you.
Well, I've been doing Zoom, which is not my favorite either.
Right. Yeah.
But and I've been doing beginners.
Okay,
and
good.
That's where the big difference comes, I think, because if they don't know any English or their English is very low. I've been working mostly with Spanish speaking people, but on Zoom, but I have had a couple others that, I don't know where they were from, Middle Eastern somewhere, but the few that I had knew a little bit more basic English. They were working and something, but if they really haven't started learning English yet, then you really have to read first.
Sure.
Because they don't know. And they want to hear what it sounds like, and I
Right.
want them to hear what it sounds like. And
Right.
and those lessons are usually very short reading. You know, they're just
Right.
little short paragraphs or even just a few sentences. And I always just say, I'm going to read it first. And if you listen, but if you come to words or you don't understand what I'm talking about, then, you know, we'll stop and talk about that at the end of the sentence or whatever. And then they do read, you know,
Right.
and the lessons that I've had with Kimberly, with the beginners on Zoom, have said, I mean, it's printed on there on the lesson, you know, that the teacher reads first and then have the student read,
Mhm.
and maybe read 2 or 3 times just for fluency. But I don't want to make them read 2 or 3 times all the time. I usually just really focus on enunciation and intonation, you know, the beginning
Right.
of a sentence and the end of a sentence, and, you know, just let them, I mean, you hear it, but if you're learning it, you have to go slow.
Right.
I've studied French forever and I can read it pretty well. I still can't understand if people are talking at normal talking speed.
Well, see.
So they don't, and same with Spanish. I understand a lot of Spanish, but I cannot keep up their
Right.
speed. Well, it's the same with us. We talk really loud, long, fast. But anyway, that's a difference, I think, is you start out reading, it's a small amount of reading, you know, you may just whatever the story or whatever is a little bit about, but it may be about a person, and it may be about they're going to go to the store, and a lot of times they don't really have a lot of pictures with them. So
Right. So let me
do
jump in with a
that.
couple of things. So, you know, there are an obvious time you would have them read, it's when there's a dialogue and they're
Mhm.
supposed to be reading the dialogue, and you want them to be able to say, hi, how you doing, or whatever correctly, and practice that. Another thing, 2 other things jumped to what I was going to say, I think, Brenda, was Brenda's comment is something we always emphasize. We usually say 80-20 rule. You want them talking 80% and you only 20. Now that's where GED might be a little different. You might be explaining something and have to talk more. But if a lower student, like Mary's talking about, the lower they are, the less you want to talk. So we did a little skit last week in the live thing. One of the new staff members, Kate, and I did a skit, and we had a woman who was just learning. And so we were having her say, you know, what's your first name? Can you spell it? Okay, let's practice, right? Okay. And we were at that level. And then we practiced the skit of the tutor, the bad tutor, who said, oh, hi, what's your name? Well, here's my name. Oh, where are you from? Oh, it says you're from Russia. Are you from Russia? I've been to Russia. How many? Oh, you know, I went with my husband on a trip, and my little dog, Fifi, went too. And if the student didn't know how to say her name and where she was from, not the time to have a discussion about how you visited Russia with your little dog, Fifi. So the less the student speaks, the less you're going to speak. If they speak very, very little, you're going to be using the absolute minimum. You don't even need to say, well, I guess Renee gave us this paper. I think we're going to start on page 8. What do you think? It's pretty, isn't it? They don't know all that. It's just going right by.
Right.
And speaking another language, as you're referring to, Mary, it's a lot of work.
It is.
Try to discern what are all these words am I supposed to know and understand. So the fewer words you give them so they can focus on the words they need, is much better.
Zoom meeting.
Another thing on that note that I have heard people do over the years that makes me a little crazy, and I should have had an example to hold up for you, is when they say, well, what sounds right? Well, none of it sounds right because they don't speak their language. So if I say to you, if you don't know French, and I say, which is better, je vais aller or je vais aller? And you'll go, well, I don't know, Renee. I don't know. I don't know French. I don't know which one's right. So they might be, if they're a really, really advanced student, but even then, if I say, which sounds right, you did well or you've done good, they might say you've done good sounds right, because that's what half of America says.
Right.
So I wouldn't ask them, what sounds right.
Well,
Okay.
and
Oh,
I
go ahead.
always say, once you start really listening, as we're learning these lessons, you start listening. The more you listen, the more it will start to sound right.
Sure, but that takes a long time. It actually
Yeah,
takes
but I
5 to
tell them
7.
that.
Yeah, it takes
I
5
just
to
tell
7.
them,
5
if
to
it's
7.
hard,
Yeah,
don't worry. It'll start to
Yeah.
sound right.
5 to
So-
7 years, they say, to really learn a language, and that's probably if you're really working at it full time, straight
Right.
full steam ahead. And of course, our students have a lot of other things going on. I want to take a minute to say hello to Arlene. Hi.
Hey,
And Arlene, have you tutored much in the past? Are you
no, I've never tutored before.
okay? All right. And hi, Bill.
I've
and,
taught school.
oh, okay. And hello to Bill and Ingrid there. I see you're there. I didn't get a chance to greet you. Okay. So yeah, Arlene and Bill and Ingrid, you can jump in anytime if you need to.
Okay.
Okay. So good. We jumped into reading aloud, and so that was one of the big issues I wanted to cover. Do we have any other questions or comments, and then we can start talking about correcting?
I have 2 questions.
Sure. Yes, Bill.
This is Bill. One is a cousin to reading aloud. I'm working with a beginner, I would say low-level beginner, and an exercise is such a transcription, where I read the sentence, she writes it down, and then she reads it back.
Okay.
And it's very clear to me, and she's so ambitious and enthusiastic. She's just a delightful student, but it's very clear to me that she doesn't understand the meaning of some of the vocabulary, some of the terms. And so I feel myself wanting to say, do you know what city is? Right? Do you know what? But I'm not sure she's at that level. So should I just ignore it and just have her work on pronunciation and enunciation and intonation? And even though she doesn't know what she's saying.
No, I would want her to have meaning with what she's writing and saying. What was I didn't catch the word you said. Do I explain the word? What example did you give?
I said city, but
City. Oh, no,
it's
I would
usually-
stop and explain. Yeah, I would say Boise is a city. You are from Guadalajara, that's a city. No, I would definitely stop and explain the meaning of those words.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then
The exception to that might be sometimes, one of the first questions we ask people is, how long have you been here? And they're at that very beginning level and they say, what means been? It's like, oh, well, that's less than 936. So if something like that, I would say been is kind of like the am, is, are, but it's a lot harder and we'll do that much later. So if it's a really complex thing like that, I wouldn't stop if
Yep.
she's at that level. Or a word like although or however, which is probably not going to be in her lesson.
no, it's not.
But those words sometimes bear looking up on a dictionary, bilingual dictionary, because they're hard to explain. But things like the verbs and nouns, boy, I would definitely stop and explain those so that she understands what she's reading and writing.
Okay. And the second question, I think has already been answered, but by a previous mentor, but in the grammar workbook that we're working through, when I try to explain what the exercise is, and I'm give an example. Oh, this is not a good example. I wish I would have brought my material.
That's okay. We understand.
Very weak example. Singular versus plural.
Right.
So that's very easy for me to understand, and Alejandra understood it immediately. But there have been other assignments where, you know, it's a full paragraph of instructions, and there is no way she's going to comprehend that. And so what I'm choosing to do is skip over it and just jump in, and then she gets the hang of it immediately. Well, not immediately. Usually very quickly.
Yeah.
Is that appropriate?
You know, that's what I would do. I don't, you know, I'd be curious to hear what some of the other teachers said. I think that's what I would do. When it's a one-line instruction, please underline the words with an S or whatever, you know, and she could understand it, or you could say, this is what underline means. Then it's probably a good idea to read the instructions. But when it's complicated like that, I would go ahead and jump in like you are.
Yeah.
What do some of you experienced tutors think? Anybody else have an opinion on that? Because I'm not sure.
Well, it sounds like having a whole paragraph of instructions is kind of hard to start with. But yeah, well, I like to you know, draw a little picture or jump around to illustrate words. And I agree. I think it's nouns and verbs are the things you focus on. You know, if you're supposed to underline, I mean, I did that with my regular elementary students. You know, even if they can read the word underline and they've been reading it for a long time, when you're doing directions, you need to go back and remember, underline, and just draw a little picture, write a word, draw a line under.
Right.
And those kind of just simple, and like you said, then just move on. And if it's still not clear, then you back up. But otherwise, I wouldn't worry about a whole big group of instructions, depending on what the lesson is, I guess. But if she's still really
just
learning,
getting to the point of what the lesson actually is and not getting distracted by maybe too many words there. I see, Chrissy, is that you with your hand up?
Yes, it is. And I had a question.
Sure.
My question is, I think maybe I know the answer. You have said you can stop in the middle of the reading of the paragraph to correct them or slow down. Is that correct?
So if you're having them read the paragraph?
Right.
Yeah, and as we said earlier, ideally, maybe you're reading it, but if they insist and you have a reason for them reading it, yeah, you could stop and say, let's go back and reread that. Or let's read that sentence together, so you could model the correct intonation. But yeah, you could stop them in the middle. And I know we're going to talk a minute about correcting. That's always a little bit like I'm interrupting, and it's, you know, I don't know that there's an exact right or wrong answer, but sure, if they're kind of off track, or they're, you know, I'll interrupt them a lot if they're not stopping at a period. I'll say, wait, you have to stop. That's a stop sign. Let's reread that, because it will make more sense if they're following the punctuation.
Okay.
So yeah,
and the second, thank you. And the second part of my question is, the last week or this week our lesson was reading, and there were sentences around like where he wears a red jacket, and they were tense. So and I was trying to describe it to her. Today he wore a red jacket. Tomorrow he will wear a red jacket, and today he wears, wore, and where. And she was like, how do you, and so I was trying to put it in the chat how to spell it, and that's what I wonder. Do you stop then? Do you go back? So you're about to talk about that, so I'll pause.
Yeah, I hope she's a higher student if she has all those verb tenses in one lesson.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know that there's a right or wrong answer to a lot of these things. I think wherever it feels appropriate, if you feel like it's better to interrupt, that's not a big deal. And then you're on Zoom, so you'd be writing it in the chat. Yeah, I think that's fine. And then that might help her with pronunciation of those too.
Great, thank you.
And hopefully then she also understands the different tenses and why they're different tenses. Yeah. I'm kind of a verb nerd and I spend a lot of time on verbs, but having 3 different tenses in one lesson, hopefully that's appropriate, I suppose, at her level. Okay, any other questions or thoughts or?
I have noticed that the students a lot of times will grab their cell phone and look in their dictionary.
Right.
Is that okay, or is it? I guess
You know, that's a really good question, Bill. That's another, it depends. I had as I was transitioning from CWI to Learning Lab, I had a class of much higher level Asian speakers at CWI, my last class there, and they were on their phones all the time. And I finally said, that's it. No, put them up. I don't want to see a phone. You cannot use your phone, because they were at a plenty high enough level that they could follow along or stop me and ask for clarification. And that it was just a crutch. I have also seen that at the lowest level with a student I had recent or currently have, who's from Syria, and he's a lovely man and he's a genius as a gifted woodworker, but not gifted with languages. He just, you can point, I can say hand and he'll go, oh, he wants to look it up. And I'm like, no, don't, this is a hand. I don't care where in the world you live. This is a hand. You're not looking it up. Obviously, then when he needs to tell me he's going to be out of town, he's going to miss, he'll get his phone and he'll say it in Arabic and it will translate it. Well, even that I was getting frustrated with, because I thought, you've had enough English now. We were almost a year in. I wanted him to say me. I didn't care if he said me, no Wednesday, no, my baby girl sick. That's fine. But he was always wanting to, do the phone. So, sometimes something's really frustrating and you just can't get, like I say, the word although or however, those words, sometimes words like that, it's just easier to go translate them. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But for them to use it as a crutch, either at the lower end or the higher end, I want to avoid them using it too much. Yeah, somebody's got to comment here. Jump in.
Are you 58, right? Okay.
Was somebody? Oh, okay. I guess that's behind Susan there.
Sorry, it's
Oh,
the hospital.
That's okay.
Renee, I did have a comment.
Yes, good.
I noticed that the students that come from Arabic or Cyrillic background, they do tend to use their phones more. And I personally don't have a problem with that, because they're trying to visually understand not only English, I mean, they're learning a whole new alphabet, not only a whole new language. So, but I have noticed in those cases where that it's not only a different word, it's a different way to write it. So, but I have noticed that.
Thanks, Teresa. That's a really good point. And, that would apply to, Asian languages and a lot of languages that have a different alphabet. And I think that the bigger point even being, it's always fine to ask. It's always fine to ask your teacher, ask other tutors for advice. But a lot of these things, there aren't a hardcore right and wrong. And as you get to know your student, maybe they don't usually need it, but they're just tired and frustrated. And they told you, I didn't sleep last night because, I got bad news or my kid was sick, and they're using it more that day. We're all human and we can flex a little bit. So there aren't really hardcore right or wrongs. Molly.
Yeah, well, I have a comment. I mean, I understand the problem of students using it too much, but I was really glad when the Google Translate came up for the Arab speaking and Cyrillic. And because I can't check a word, I had a problem with the student spring. We wanted bed spring. I can't tell when he looks it up, and it was great. He said, use images for that.
True. Yeah.
So he got me something really good. But when I can't check and the word has different meanings, I'm perfectly happy to go for it with the phone.
Absolutely.
I always wondered though, with my poor Ukrainian woman this spring, if she wasn't checking the news from Ukraine or if she was looking up a word. But that was just probably
who knows. But that's
anyway.
A good point too. When you have a word like spring, if they look it up, the first word that comes up for them is probably going to be the season. And that's not going to make sense. And so I was doing some translation from when I was teaching in Chad. There were some English texts that the higher students were translating, and they had the word loom, the building looms over the street. And they had translated it as the loom you weave on. And it was, what if these kids are confused? That wouldn't make any sense. And same thing with spring, you know, so that is hard because they look it up on their dictionary and you don't know if they got the word, if they look confused, it may be because they got the wrong definition. So, but Google Images is your friend. If you aren't comfortable with that on your phone, have somebody show you, or we have laptops. If you're and if you know if you're on Zoom, you know you can minimize it, find Google Images, bring it up. But yeah, a picture like that of a bed spring would save you a lot of hassle.
I have a comment, please.
Yes, Jean.
It might turn into a little sermonette, but I hear a little bit of frustration in a lot of these comments, like you got to get it now, and they just do not get it now. And the point where you work with the same student for weeks, maybe months, but when that light goes on in their eye, and you know they got it, that's the payoff. And everybody's going to be different. You can't get everybody to learn on the same class in the same hour. Some will, some won't. So don't get frustrated and anxious. It'll come. You just have to stick with it.
Perfect, Jean. I saw you coming. I thought, Gene doesn't need anything. He's been here before, but he'll probably add something brilliant. Thank you. That's so true. And especially grammar points. Like I said, I'm such a verb nerd, but you know, do and does is so hard. And I just beat a dead horse on that so much. But it takes a month to figure that out and to use it correctly. And I've taught recently taught some higher students the perfect tenses. And that's really, I usually teach the tutors at the same time, how and when it's used. And I said, if you only get 30% this first go round, just kind of start to hear it and know a little bit of what's going on. And then maybe we do it again in 6 months and you get 70%. And you may never use it perfectly. A lot of English native speakers don't use it perfectly. So yeah, they don't, that's a really good, it takes time. And you'll have some words that come up that you'll have to tell them, you're not going to use this word that much. So don't worry about this vocabulary word. Another one you might say, well, now this one is really important. But occasionally there are vocabulary words you'll see and go, I don't know why that's in that lesson. Just assure them that's really not a high priority word. Does anybody else have a quick question? I want to move on to correcting. Anybody else? Anything? I'm not seeing any hands or anything. Okay, let's talk about correcting. And this is a lot more of a, well, it depends. I found an old PowerPoint I did, and I'm going to see if I can just share that for a second. Where's my share screen coming up? Here we go. Okay, so I don't know if some of you are like me, you know, I correct my children and my family and they don't appreciate it, but just to start with the cartoon.
Yeah. Yep, there. So here we go.
See if I just go to this full they've changed PowerPoint every now and then on me. So anyway, next one. So I want you to, it's important to correct. A lot of times tutors say, oh, they're so sweet and they're trying so hard and I hate to correct them. No, when I tell students, I'm training tutors, what do you want me to say to them? First thing they say is tell them, thank you, I really appreciate them, they're so sweet. Okay, but the next thing is tell them to correct me. I want to be corrected. No one else will correct them. The nice people at the library don't correct them. Their neighbors probably don't. Sometimes they have a friend, a neighbor, or coworker who's good to correct. But most of the time, they either don't want to or don't know how to. So you're the one who needs to correct them. The other side of that too, and you say, well, I feel bad. When I taught in Chad for 3 years, no one would correct me. I was the teacher. I was on this pedestal. And there were things I said wrong for 3 years because no one told me. And I think, how bad was that? How stupid did I sound? it's better if some kind person, they get to know you, they establish a relationship with you, and it's much better if you're willing to correct them. Now, it used to be we took breaks before COVID, and if you're standing around a break talking informally, you wouldn't correct them there. If you run into them at Winco, they love to see you and introduce you to their family and meet your family. I wouldn't correct them in a social situation like that. However, in a lesson, the rule of thumb up here in the top left would be correct them on things they've already learned. So, but you don't know sometimes what they've already learned. Sometimes it's your first time working with a student and you aren't sure. But let's pretend you do know. Let's say you're working with a student that you know has studied past tense. Maybe you've worked with them on past tense for 2 or 3 weeks. And you start by saying, you know, what did you do this weekend? And the student says, that's the example I've got. The student says, I go to a movie last night. Ideally, you can say, oh, really? You went to a movie? And the student would restate it and say, yes, I went to a movie last night. Sometimes they don't hear, they go, yeah, you know, you correct them and they go, uh-huh, and they go on. Sometimes I'll even stop, especially, you know, if I know a student well and I use a lot of humor, and I go, wait, back up. Say that again. I went to a movie. Some of them are like a runaway train, you know, you ask them something and they start talking, they make 100 errors. And where do I start? It is good if you have one thing, you know, you're going to correct, because you're always going to correct what they're working on in that lesson. And I have occasionally seen worksheets come back where the student wrote I is and the tutor didn't correct it. You always want to correct what they're working on. So hopefully this student would model, you know, they would hear, I went to the movie last night, and they'd correct themselves. But if they don't, I'd probably go back and you know, make them do it again. So here, for example, if the student says, this weekend I go to movie, I eat at restaurant with daughter and husband of daughter, and I clean house. The tutor says, sounds like you had a busy weekend. Could you say that again and remember to use the past tense? Hey, Susan in the hospital waiting room, do you have a mute? Do you know how to mute the background?
Let me try.
Let's see. I think I
It's
can
on my
mute.
phone, and so it's so small.
Okay, you know what? I think I can mute you, but if I don't want you to not be able to talk. So if you want to talk, you know, do this or something, and I'll unmute you. But I think I can mute you here. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, I can.
All right.
Yeah.
There we go. I think she's good now. Okay, should have figured that out a little bit earlier. Susan, I appreciate your dedication to do this. She's waiting for her father to recover from surgery. So thank you for being here. Anyway, so the student has said, you know, I go, I eat, I clean, and we need past tense. So I would say, have her say that again, and I would stay on it. So she's probably going to say, oh, okay, this weekend I went to a movie and I eat at restaurant. You went to a movie and what? And I eat, no, what's past tense of eat? Oh, I went to a movie, I ate at a restaurant, and I cleaned my house. Clean, what's the past tense of clean? I would stay right on her to make her use past tense every time. Now, again, you know, hopefully you are familiar with your student, comfortable with doing that. What about the other question that comes up then? What about this daughter and husband of daughter? So ELL teachers will talk about making meaning. You want people to make meaning. And I have a little trouble with that because, again, I can make meaning and still sound really awkward and uneducated. People that they're going to be here for their whole lives, they want to sound better. So making meaning, you've been here 3 years, you don't want to be at the level saying, my girl sick. You know, you want to be able to say, my daughter is sick. So I don't know that making meaning is always enough. However, in this situation, we know who she ate with. She made meaning. She ate with her daughter and the husband of her daughter. Do you go back and say, let's say daughter's husband, or let's say son-in-law? You could. Again, I'd say it depends on the student. If you know they just talked about that, you could say, hey, remember I just talked about my mother-in-law? Well, this can be your son-in-law. And remember how we had that word, and you show them son-in-law. That's okay. That's probably fine. What I would not do is start to go son-in-law, daughter-in-law. Well, I have a cousin now. Was that cousin-in-law? Now, I don't know. Now, what's your cousin's mother? Well, now your cousin's mother's your aunt. I wouldn't go into a 30-minute lesson about family relationships. I usually say try not to go more than one step off the path, because they often do have a lot of questions, and we all want to teach them everything we can right now. So it's understandable that you think, okay, I'm going to teach son-in-law, daughter-in-law, mother-in-law, father-in-law. I'm going to teach possessives. I'm going to say daughter, possessive, daughter, apostrophe S, husband. It would also be okay to say daughter's husband, especially if you know they've worked on that, and say, here's a reminder of what you could say. Or you could show them that really quickly, but don't go into a 30-minute lesson about possessives. You could tell the teacher, you know, they don't seem to know possessives. Have they worked on that? That might be a good lesson for the future. But I wouldn't, you can either do son-in-law or daughter's husband or ignore it. I just wouldn't go off on any of those tangents for another 30 minutes.
Renee,
Yes.
that's what I was going to say. Usually in a lesson where I had this happen a couple of times this last time, where the mother, and she had children and grandchildren, and she just didn't know how to talk about that. If I asked her just a basic question, she didn't know how to say the ages, you know, how old is your student, and she just didn't know how. So I pretty much just left it right there, and we went ahead and did the lesson. And then I told the teacher that this is something, you know, would be a really good lesson for her, because that's a one-on-one. When you're in a group of people, you know, that's a different thing. But I mean, you're still want to tell the teacher, but that she was so relieved.
Right.
She got that lesson. And that's happened several times when you've got really, really beginners and you don't have time to go way off path. But I would say a good advice is to make a note of it and tell the teacher, where you can have a focus lesson on, you know, relationship names and or whatever.
And
I have a funny how to correct. I had a lesson with she was a beginner, but she was really bright and she was catching on really fast. And there was a lesson on naming the all things. It was a big lesson, but things in the kitchen, spoon, fork, all just the names. It was vocabulary. And then there'd be a little paragraph or sentences. And she kept mixing up chicken
and kitchen. Yes, that's classic. Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, I mean, it's just, but
yeah, they sound alike.
She'd read it. And the first time I just, you know, stopped after she got done reading her a couple of sentences, and I stopped and I went through, you know, this is what you did. This is the chicken, and handling it with humor.
Right. Humor is great.
And just so then the next time when she did it, I just started laughing. I didn't have to say anything. I just go, you know, and she'd self-correct. And another just little story. I had a student, a man who was just starting with 0, and I worked with him quite a long time. And, you know, he's just struggled, but he told me that he went to the store, and when he was leaving, he said, instead of saying, have a good day, which is what he really meant to say, he said, Happy Valentine's Day to the clerk. And then he goes, he said, oh. And I said, you know, they know what you meant.
Absolutely.
You know, because of his tone of voice. And so those kind of things, I think really humor is huge.
I agree. Humor is huge. And from teaching and being a language learner, I have 1,000 of those stories. But they're and chicken and kitchen is a classic one. I see we're getting close to being out of time here. So let's see. I think that kind of, oh, here's just a quick one about, don't tell students that they should only speak English at home. Tutors have somehow, in an ideal world, that would be great because immersion is the best way to learn. But I have a handout I used to give out about a fourth grade teacher who told the parents that. So the fourth grader comes home and the parents are don't speak good English. So they're saying, you have good day, you friends, many friends. And now the girl thinks her parents are not real bright. It's especially with the parents of the young children in our family literacy program. We tell them, and most of them know this, but reassure them, children need to be in a rich language environment. And they need to be making rhymes and singing silly songs. It doesn't matter if it's Urdu. They need to be in a rich language environment, and their parents can't offer that in the second language. So the kids will figure that out. Also, unless you've been in this situation speaking another language, when you're at home and you're talking to your family and you just need to say, hey, Dylan, you put your coat up. Honey, will you hand me that? And you go help your brother. You can't do all that in another language. You're already overloaded trying to get dinner on with 3 kids. And so this just isn't really helpful. And if they have teenagers, the teenagers just say, well, I don't know, Mom, you sound stupid. Oh, hey, yeah, there we go. I don't know how to unmute you. I'm trying. It says I have to ask you to unmute. I'm so sorry. Do you need to go? I'm so sorry. I thought I could unmute you, Susan, but it says ask you to unmute. I'm sorry, Susan. Can you
go?
Okay. All right. Good. I'm sorry. Thank you. Thank you for coming. Good luck with your dad. Okay. Good luck with your dad.
Yeah. I don't want to. Okay. It was just a training. Sorry.
Oh, okay. I think she's going. Okay. So anyway, don't ask children to do that. The teenagers will just tell them they're stupid, and that doesn't help anybody. Let's move real quickly to correcting pronunciation. So that's a hard one. Again, an easy rule of thumb, correct it if it interferes with meaning. So Spanish speakers will also always say a school. They'll put a short E in front of the S. A school, a snake. That doesn't really interfere with meaning. If they really want to work on it, you want to work on it a little bit, you could, but that's not really one of the more important things. Also, a student, sometimes I've had students say, no, I want to work just on this for the whole period. That's way too long to work on pronunciation. 5 minutes is probably best because it's just hard. Also, it's hard to see on this slide, but the student must first learn to distinguish the sound. If they don't have that sound in their language, they aren't even used to hearing the difference between bit and bet and lit and let. It might take them a year. Somebody, Jean commented on, being patient. It might take them a year to hear those sounds. So you can practice them a little bit, but boy, this is definitely one where you don't expect mastery in one lesson. It can take quite a while. And these bit and bet, those are called minimal pairs, where you're just teaching one sound. I was working on this with my evening students recently, and we were doing the short I and long E for Spanish speakers, which does interfere with meaning. Because, forgive me, I'm gonna say bad words, but shit and sheet and bitch and beach. When I taught junior high, those got kids in trouble a lot. So we were working on that, but again, it takes a while. And we have those pictures of the tongue and the lips and all that. Those line drawings, I find them extremely unhelpful myself. I just try to think where my tongue and lips are. And I'm going to turn this off because I want to see everybody again. Okay. I just try to think where my tongue and lips are and try to think how to reproduce that sound. A couple of easy things with a Spanish speaker, the Y and the J, jello, yellow, Jew, you. But the J tongue goes up for the J, and down for the Y. So jello, if you say jello, your tongue's up here. If you say yellow, we do it so naturally, we don't think about it, but yellow, it's down. So I have my Spanish speaking students trained when they start saying something, I go, tongue down. And then we'll make them go, young, yellow, you. And we make, laugh about it, but tongue down, they'll go, oh yeah, okay. And then they can do it. They just have to think about it. The other easy one, and if we were in person, I'd make you all do it. Although our new teacher, Kate, recently said, I don't do that. I make students take a piece of paper, you kind of have to limber it up, and then hold it here to go, what, when, where, and make them blow where. Now be careful, because who doesn't do that, right? What, when, where, and make them blow the paper. And then they confuse where and were. So a really tough one is to go, where were you? Where were you? That's kind of tough, actually. Those are some easy ones. The L and the R for Asians is a lot harder, I think, to correct. So again, you can work on things, but I wouldn't work on them more than 5 or 10 minutes. More important probably is intonation. When you're teaching a new word, students will say, I told them I go to library. And I'm like, the what? You went where? Library. I went to library to get a book. Oh, the library. So I'll have them either pound on the desk like they're drumming or clap it out. Library. So often if you're teaching a multisyllabic word, you don't have to teach them the word multisyllabic, but I do sometimes remind them that words have more than one syllable, more than one beat, and then clap it out. There's a student in one class called Fatima, and a lot of us are used to saying Fatima. That's the difference in the accent, right? One's Fatima and one's Fatima. Or a student from Mexico says her husband works in construction. Really common in French and Spanish. They often have the same word with a different accent. So we worked on construction. And she says it right now. My husband works in construction. So those things you can beat it like you're playing a drum. You can also use a rubber band to say construction. And anytime you can make them do something physical that way, it really helps the memory. And that's one reason we try to, hear it, see it, write it. If you can act it out, all of those things, the more senses you can use, the more likely they can learn it and remember it. Okay, got 5 minutes left. I think that's my, I'll think of 12 things as soon as I turn off Zoom, but I think I think that's most of what I wanted to say. Any comments, thoughts, questions, arguments?
I have a question for you.
Yes. Okay.
It's a little bit reverse of what you were talking about.
Okay.
But I find sometimes, particularly women from the Middle East, do not want to drop down in their level of teaching. If you see that they are struggling too much, you say maybe we should try something a little easier. They resist that a lot. Is there a way of overcoming that?
Well, that's something we do face quite a bit. It's interesting you said Middle Eastern women. I have had that a lot with African men, and it could be anybody. That's a tough one. So some like CWI, some programs will evaluate people when they come in. We don't, for a couple of reasons. It takes orientation very, very long. And people are nervous the first time they're there and talking to you. So it's really difficult at Learning Lab when we have a new student we haven't met and we really don't know what their level is and we're guessing. I've had students that I thought had no English because they came with their mother-in-law and she did all the talking and I thought they didn't speak. So I give them something, ABC, you write your name, and actually they speak very well. But the opposite happens a lot too. And especially students will come to us and say, I want to get my GED. So our in-house rule for that is a certain test called the TABE test. We do the TABE D and it's scored, and we say they have to speak on read on a 9th grade level to do the GED test. Well, if you're doing that in your second language or your third or fourth language, you may feel like you're pretty adequate,
Mhm.
and you may have good speaking but poor literacy. And we sometimes have people insist on that, and honestly they're on a second grade level, and you feel terrible telling this very proud professional maybe person that they're reading on a second grade level. So we do everything we can to avoid that, but inevitably there are those glitches. I guess, Jean, I guess one way to say it, instead of saying let's go back, would be saying yeah, I think we need to spend some more time on X. So they're doing past tense and they don't really understand present. Maybe just instead of saying go back, say, let's review present a little bit. Because that's a hard one. Just I guess maybe finding the best way to say it, because I definitely know what you mean. That's one of the really hard things.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
Renee?
that is a tough one. Yes. Teresa.
Just along those lines, and it would be difficult, be really difficult to do on Zoom, but in person, one of my students, he's fairly high level. A couple of weeks ago, it became obvious that she was having difficulty with concepts like under, over, between, and back of. And so we just got out those little figures and just started playing, and she's got it now. And that's all it took. Instead of saying, we're going to step back, we'll say, let's do something different.
Yeah. And that's one thing I love to do with lower speakers is the prepositions, because you can take a notebook and a pen, or if you've got a cup, put the pencil in the cup, put the pencil beside the cup, put the pen on the cup, put the cup on the book. Or with people, if you've got several students, stand between, Molly, stand between Jean and Bill. Bill, stand next to Molly. Molly, stand next to Brenda. Brenda, move between Molly and Jean. So those are kind of fun to do impromptu. Just you can kind of stop and do that for a few minutes. Yeah, it's probably the way so they don't feel like they're going back some way.
Okay.
But I know sometimes it's hard to avoid that, or they see the book looks easier or has bigger print and it looks easier. And people, it's just hard to come here. You feel stupid. It's hard when you're speaking. The house is green. You know how you sound, and so people are proud. And Jean, I know you're very sensitive to that, as we all are. Right? That's why we work with people. That's tough.
May I make
Yes.
2 quick points, or
Please do.
To what you were just saying? Also, I've had a number of students whose intellectual knowledge of English was far superior to their ability to speak, which is normal. And we all know, if we've learned one, that they've studied it in school and they understand a lot. The speaking is hard. So I try to always reinforce how much they do know. And so hoping they don't feel bad or whatever if we're doing something basic to speak. And I think I agree. It's how you put it across that, oh, you know all these words. Let's work on pronouncing them or whatever it is. I just wanted to make the point it's funny about the prepositions, because I just did that over Zoom with a student. We had
it's harder over Zoom.
It is, but it was very doable, and I think it really helped her. And we used flashcards, and then something I hadn't done before that Kimberly had. The New York Times has these photos, and you have it's specifically for teachers to use, and you have the student describe it. And so you can find a photo, and you could do this with any photo, any picture, and just ask them to describe it using prepositions. And someone's over, above, next to, and that worked very well. It wasn't very hugely detailed, but it is possible on Zoom. I just did it.
Yay! Good. I'm noticing that it is 1 o'clock. I'm on the clock. I can stay as long as you guys want to, but I want to make a clear stop here. If anybody needs to say goodbye, don't hesitate. If you want to check out now, that's fine. Any of you want to stay, we can keep talking. I'm good with that. But okay, bye, Molly. Thank you for coming. Yes, thanks, Bill and Ingrid. Good to see you. So yeah, don't hesitate if you need. Goodbye, Jean. Thank you for coming, Jean.
Okay, thanks, Renee.
Sure. Okay, yeah, any of the rest. Yeah, bye, Brenda. Thank you. Okay. Yeah,
Renee,
stay on if you want to, but if you need to go, that's fine.
Renee,
Well,
I
I
have
just wanted to say it's good to see you, Renee.
Thank you. You too, Mary. Yes,
Bye-bye.
Bill.
I have just one real quick question.
Okay.
And it involves, and it's in the context of Zoom teaching, but a student's motivation. So when I first started, even though I was a new tutor, and I've never taught a language, made that very clear to all the powers that be. But, I mean, I've practiced law for 30 years. I have a good intellect and can communicate well. But I was in a class with Alejandra, who is a lower beginning student, but very motivated, and then two Congolese men. And one of them was a beginner, but he wouldn't really pay attention. He would check his phone. He would communicate on his phone. It was clear that he was very tired and he was constantly yawning. And he just, and he was at Deseret Industries. So I started suspecting that really kind of saw this as a way to take a free 1 hour break. And yeah. I didn't want to waste the lesson by correcting, like I felt torn. I wanted to correct him, say, Mufami, please, do not look at your phone, or Mufami, please, pay attention to me. But I didn't want to disrupt the rest of the other two students. Yeah. But then I also thought that if I didn't interrupt it, it was disrupting the class. If I waited and then talked to the instructor about it and had the instructor correct Mufami. One class, well, actually, it wasn't just one class, it became a pattern. And I asked to no longer have him be in my group. And which was a good decision. I mean, it was very beneficial for Alejandra, very, very beneficial for her. So, but I'm sure with the shortage of teachers, I'm going to be having multiple students by Zoom in the future. I plan on doing this a long time.
Yeah, that is a tough, I think you definitely did the right thing. I guess, is this with Kim? Is Kim the teacher? Who's the teacher?
No, Leela right now.
Leela, okay. Yeah, and that's a good one, definitely, to refer back to the teacher, because sometimes we'll pull a student apart and say, well, this doesn't really seem to be working for you right now. You're having to miss a lot of classes. I understand you're probably sleepy. I have students that come after working all night, but there are times we say to a student, this doesn't seem to be working very well right now. So maybe you need to try again in a few months. Just, or have the teacher one-on-one. Maybe if he's one-on-one, he can't mess around. He's going to have to focus or not. So, I mean, definitely, I'm glad Leela pulled him out of there. That seems like definitely the way to go.
Somebody before that that's no longer with the Learning Lab. I cannot remember.
Gloria, maybe. Probably yes, Gloria.
It was Gloria. Yeah, she was in Oregon.
Yeah.
Yeah, I loved her.
Oh, good. I'll pass that on to her. She'll be glad to hear that. But yeah, it is hard sometimes. And I haven't, like I said, I haven't done as much on Zoom, so I haven't had that on Zoom, but I actually kicked a guy out of class a while back who he wouldn't let us teach him anything. Everything we did, he'd say, I know that, I already know that. And he'd say it wrong, do it wrong. He was doing a bar or a pie chart one time, and he got the answer totally wrong. He said, well, that's not the way I would do it. And I'm like, well, really, there's only one way to do this on the GED math test. This went on for months, and I finally said, look, if we can't teach you anything, you need to go somewhere else. And yeah, the guy may have been trying to just get out of work, who knows. So we do, we're pretty mellow and pretty flexible, but there are limits.
But that was your role as a teacher, not a mentor.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's where I would definitely kick it back to the teacher and let them, let we're at least getting paid to do the hard stuff. So I definitely kick it back to them and say, yeah, say we need to make a change here. And if it's in person sometimes, and one person is dominating, then sometimes.
I can't, I'm disabled, so I can't do input in
Yeah, okay.
person, so.
But well, even on, even if it's on Zoom like this and one person is dominating. So Bill, you're sitting there so quietly, but I'll use you as an example. So if Bill is dominating and he's cutting off Bill Brudenell up there in the corner, if Bill Brudenell is dominating this Bill, I might say, okay, we're going to take turns. So don't answer till I call on you. Okay. And then hopefully you'd have different names, and then I'd say, okay, it's your turn, Joe. Okay, now you, Sam. No, Sam, wait. No, Sam, Sam, wait. It's Joe's turn. Whatever I said. I forgot the names I already said. So I would just be really specific. Sometimes, you have to become the third grade teacher, and say, no, we're going to take turns. And no, you're talking out of turn. And you have to be kind of a little dominant sometimes with that, which it is a little embarrassing with adults, because it's not like with kids, you're being sensitive to what you're doing there, but yeah, no, it sounds like you handle it well, and Lila will figure out something.
Yeah, well, I just have one-on-one, which is perfect for me and her,
Yeah.
so.
Sounds like that's best for her too. I think it's pretty hard to do Zoom on several.
I think, to be honest, as a suggestion for the program, I think multiple students and one mentor on Zoom is, my guesstimate is 50% as effective.
I think so too. And I think Leela's probably doing that because she's short. She just started that class and she's probably short of tutors. But yeah, there may be a few. When I first started Zoom, when we first shut down, we had 2 or 3 students that knew each other. They had worked together in class. And then I worked with them on Zoom, and that was fine. They knew each other. They were at the exact same level. But I find it hard too on Zoom. It's hard to get acquainted and have that personal interaction. But if it's one-on-one on Zoom, then you can do that a lot better. I mean, I feel good talking to you here, like I'm connecting. But when you've got 3 or 4 and it's on Zoom and you don't know them and you don't know how much they want to say to each other, it makes it a lot harder.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much for this.
You're welcome. Absolutely. Good to meet you. And
Nice
good luck
to
with everything.
All right.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.